Welcome to the Numbers Don't Tell Stories show. Each week, we like to give our listeners ideas on how to evaluate numbers through story. Our desire is to entertain you and provide you with useful insight. All right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to episode 7 of Numbers Don't Tell Stories, and I'm one of your co-hosts, Tom Etchison. That's Matthew Dix, and tonight we're continuing our storytelling about numbers with a new episode, and we think we've got a fun one tonight, or at least I'm excited about it, Matthew. And so we're gonna dive right into this and kind of give you all maybe some interesting insight here tonight on stories.
Yeah, I'm excited about this one too.
Let me share this with everybody. So this is a tweet, or whatever they're calling them now. I think Elon calls them posts. So this is a post on X. And for everybody who's listening, who's not looking at the video, this is a tweet of the famous baseball announcer, mostly associated with the Cubs, Harry Caray, and it's from a Twitter account, or an X account, Baseball History Nut, and it notes that Harry Caray kept a drinking diary from 1971 to 1972. He recorded that he stopped at 2,604 individual bars, individual bar stops. That amounted to 3.56 bars per night on average. And I just find that number to be incredible, or those numbers to be incredible. I think it's incredible that we're sitting talking to the man who came up with Homework for Life. Who knew that Harry Caray was doing that on drinking before you knew about it? And I just find it fascinating that somebody would think to diary their drinking, which is amazing, and keep that close of track to it. And so as I started to dive into Harry Caray, because I didn't know a lot of history about him, and I find it fascinating that he started announcing pro baseball in 1945 for the Cardinals, which was his favorite team kind of growing up. And he also spent 11 years announcing for the White Sox. And that was the time period where he kept the drinking diary. So I don't know if those two are correlated or not. And then he started announcing for the Cubs in 82, and then that went through 1997, and he died in 1998. And he started singing, interestingly, Take Me Out to the Ball Game while he was doing games for the White Sox, specifically in 1976. And I found an incredibly interesting quote attributed to him that might explain some of the number of stops. He said that he was frequently known for saying that the taxi driver, the bartender, the waitress, the man in the street, those are my people. He was known for partying, and he was always making friends with bartenders and so on. So I found that fascinating, but I still couldn't put any of this in context for me in real life. I was trying to think of like what might I do like 4 times every day, and so I kept thinking about this, and then it made me wonder. And so I looked up Cal Ripken. In a 21-year career, had 2,632 consecutive games. Harry Caray did almost that many bars in a year.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think is just fascinating. So anyway, so there's some context, there's some emotion to connect to this. Like, you could have said, to make this memorable, you could have put this into, Harry Caray's the Iron Man of bar visits, or something, to put it into another baseball context, or, memorialize it in that way.
Yeah, in terms of the story, I thought this was one of those that sort of there's an implication without any evidence, right? So if you're going to 3.56 bars per night, right, the implication is you're probably tying one on every night, but that's not necessarily true, right?
True.
So, you know, I don't really drink anymore. I probably really haven't drank alcohol in 30 years, honestly, other than champagne toasts at weddings and things like that. I've been in a lot of bars, not nearly as
Right.
many as Harry Caray, but I was just in one 2 nights ago,
Yeah.
and I had 0 drinks in that
Right.
bar, right? So if you counted my bars over the last 30 years, let's say I have had 300 bar visits over the last 30 years, I've probably had 2 drinks in all of those visits. So it's interesting to me. I'm wondering how much was the guy drinking? I also
Right.
noted that he was 57 at this point when he was recording this diary. So,
Yeah.
he wasn't like a 23-year-old. He was
Yeah.
57 years old. So it's just interesting to wonder what's being left out here and probably what we can't actually figure out. I doubt in that drinking diary that he indicated how many drinks he was having per night. That would be the data we would really want because this is
Right.
sort of just the implication of a story, but not necessarily the story.
But it kind of leaves you wanting more, right?
Yes.
It leaves you wanting that that big unveil at the end, and you're right. Being apparently he's an incredibly social individual and loved being out with the people. So the fact that he went to a bar, that's a great place to come in contact with public. So if that's what you're interested in, to your point, that it doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting you know consuming too much each night or whatever. And so I did find it fascinating that he kept track of it. And I'm also curious if, because I know, like with Homework for Life, and we've talked about this before, it's one of those things that slows down time.
Right. For
And
sure.
I wonder if he ever had the chance to go back and look at that and think in terms of, did that slow down time for him, and did he ever do it again, or was this like a one and done on this situation?
Yeah, my father-in-law, since about 1970, oddly, he has a journal in which he has recorded every movie he has seen when he's gone out to the theater, and included in the movie was also a rating of the movie, so how he felt about it,
Wow.
who he went to the movie with, and what he wore to the movie. And so it's sort of a fascinating journal of his
Yeah.
movie-going experience, which was considerable. They used to go to 2 or 3 movies a week, and so it's
Wow.
quite a lengthy thing. I've asked him to will it to me because it is something I sort of really would love to have.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting about this, which I always think about when we're talking about data, is why 71 to 72, which is to say, why did it stop in 72? Like when we gather the data often is almost as interesting as the data itself. Like what
Right.
was the choice? Like what triggered in 1971, oddly the year I was born. The year
Yeah.
I was born, Harry Carey decided to suddenly begin keeping a drinking diary, and it lasted for maybe a year, although this date is even kind of wonky because I would hope it's 2 full years based upon the numbers we're looking at. But imagine if it was from November of 71 to March of 72, right? We don't
Right.
really even know if it's 2 years or if it's a
Right.
collection of months.
Right. Well, and in all this stuff, was there, I mean, I don't know if it can coincided with a divorce or a marriage, or multiple things that could have been happening, and maybe it was just the the travel, and that's how he passed the time on the road, and so on, because he was known for, he was doing both the home and the away games, and so on. And are there other diaries of his? Was he a prolific diary keeper, that, and this just happens to be the one that has come out? I didn't find anything associated with that, but it is interesting, like in this story there's kind of a million ways to look at this and questions to ask. But I keep coming back to the idea that this is from this ex post of this baseball history nut, And to me, you missed the lead of, hey, we could have really tied this into Cal Ripken pretty easily to give those numbers some relative meaning, for people, because a lot of people are, very, you can remember the Cal Ripken, um, record, and then to be able to tie Harry Caray to that would be, just an incredible way to tie those memories together.
Yeah, and if you're someone like me who watched Ripken end his streak, not in person but on television, but I remember where I was sitting, and I remember that entire game. I was not an Orioles fan, I'm a Yankees fan, but it was a big enough thing that sometimes when we tell stories like the one you've described, we can latch into the memory that someone has, and you connect to these two sort of seemingly independent moments. You bring them together as one moment, and it just becomes so much more memorable as a result. So it really does make a lot of sense. I think interesting, if we had been more of a researcher based podcast, we probably could have dug into correlations as well. Like, does this correlate to the record of the team? Like, is this the
Right,
worst year where the most losses occurring, or maybe the most wins? So he was going out and celebrating with the fans after victories, right? Or was something going on in his life, like a divorce, or
yeah,
was his son in town, and his son was now 22, and they were hitting the bars together for a year. Like, someone
right,
maybe listening to this podcast could start looking for some correlations
right.
in Harry Caray's life, and give more context to the numbers than what we have already.
Yeah, drop that in the comments for sure, and that'd be very, very interesting to see. And maybe it's geopolitics, who knows, at
Right,
that time, I mean, it could easily be all the above,
right.
I don't know what interest rates were in 71 and 72. Maybe it was he couldn't, the thought of having to shell out a huge interest rate for a house was a bummer. I don't know.
So he invested it in alcohol instead.
Yeah. or
Yeah,
or just or just talking to other people and commiserating about it all. So
right.
anyway, yeah,
You taught me something that I really hadn't known, and I think is pretty fascinating too. Not many baseball announcers become famous in their own right. Like, he might be one of the most famous. And had you asked me before we began speaking, I would have said he was a Cubs announcer probably for his entire life. And it turns out
right,
he was the announcer of, other teams for nearly as long. And I think actually what made him famous was the fact that he started singing with the fans. I suspect
right,
had he not become so famous for opening the window to his booth and singing, he would have gone the way of most baseball announcers, which are people who are slightly famous in their market for a period of time, and then eventually they fade away from the market and from the memories. So it's an interesting data point in terms of how do you become memorable, and for him, he became memorable because he did what I always tell people to do, which is find something that you can do that is different than everybody else.
right.
And I suspect that one thing is why I know his name and why he's associated with the Cubs, and his career with those other baseball teams are utterly irrelevant to me because he didn't make those particular times in his life very different.
Right. Well, and it's the adage, and it's the, kind of the reason why we're doing this is because we genuinely are interested in these things, and it forces seeing this thing and seeing this persona of this, person that we think we know, and then you start to dig into it and you realize, oh, there's so much more to this individual and beyond the song, but that's what makes him memorable, and that's what forces you down that path to just gaining more information about him. And that's, to me, that's the power of numbers and data, is going back now and looking at those things and seeing where there's additional meaning.
Yeah, you almost wonder too, people probably aren't aware of it, or people of a certain age, but at the time he was calling the games, the Cubs didn't have lights. And
Mm,
so every single game was a day game for the Cubs when he was calling them. Does he hang his head out of the window and sing the song if he's calling night games? Like, that's probably not the same as the middle of the afternoon and opening the window and hanging your head out. So
right,
maybe the reason he starts singing at the Cubs games is because there are no lights, and so when he hangs his head out, everyone can see him because it's the middle of the day for every single Cubs game until they
yep,
finally get lights in sometime in the mid to late 80s, I think. So even
right,
odd bits of data like that might be lost ephemera to most people that might actually play a huge role in how he is actually known to me today. It is simply the fact that he called games for a team that didn't have lights when every other team in the league had lights and could play night games.
Right. And I think that's what's so unique about, especially people who are baseball fans. They have a lot of those stats and numbers and memories, and then here's now another one to tie that together, to
Right.
your point. And I think that's, again, that's the power of storytelling, and that's why it's been so powerful over time, is that it keeps that tapestry growing and going, so to speak. And so I think that's what, to me, something like this just adds to the overall richness of baseball and those numbers that people think about there. You see all these stats about, averages and things like that, and then you throw in Harry Caray's 3.56, bars per night, and then now you've got something, that's funny to add into all of this.
Yeah. Well, I have a Diet Coke here, so I will toast my Diet Coke to Harry Carey and
Yeah.
his 2,604 individual bar stops.
Well,
Long live the Cubs.
yeah. Well, it's a great place to end this, on a Diet Coke and a salute to Harry Carey. So thanks for playing along tonight, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.
You've reached the end of the show. We ask that if you found this useful, that you please tell a friend. Leave us a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. And if you're watching us via YouTube, please like and subscribe.